Hi, good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to our first panel today on the topic of Islam and democracy, why religion and religious values matter. My name is Asma Saruddin. I'm the chair of the board of directors of CSID, and I will be moderating this panel. So we have 4 panelists today who will be sharing their perspectives on this critical topic. The format of the panel is as follows. Each panelist will make initial remarks for about 13 to 15 minutes, and we have to watch the time like a hawk because we are constrained by time. And after the conclusion of each of these presentations, I will then offer everyone an opportunity to engage among yourselves first for about 10 minutes or so. And then at the end, I will open it up to the floor and we invite your comments and your questions. And I'm very much hoping for a lively discussion of this very important topic. Our first speaker is John Thomas Pinna, who is the Executive Director of Muslims for Muslims International. I think the program lists the organization incorrectly. And the title of his presentation is The Amman Message and Participatory Governance in the Muslim World. John.
This is what happens when you get 50 or above. You need glasses to read your speech. I want to thank my hosts. I see a lot of old friends here, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you all. My mother would say that there's always space for the niceties and the protocols and the cordialities. So I thank you, I thank my hosts, and I appreciate the sponsors of this event and for allowing me to come and speak and spend some time with you. When I was thinking about writing this speech, a buddy of mine from the northern territories of Pakistan, he said to me in Urdu, "Kam karo besa panao," which basically means keep your head down, make money. And I thought about something that my grandfather said to me some time ago, Bitu Rabdi Nadari, which is basically mind your own business. We cannot afford to be siloed, divided by factionalism. My name is Pinna. It was Latinized from Pana, and my grandfather would always say, our name is ancient and indisputable, with his hand up in the air. And this came to mind when I was writing my comments. Democracy isn't a Western patent. It is ancient and indisputable. Before Jefferson penned Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, Bedouin tribes were holding shura councils under the desert stars, and Pashtun elders were hashing out decisions in the Jurgalon house. Consent of the governed isn't a Western import. It's older, sand-worn technology built right into our Muslim software. So why in 2025 do pundits still treat Islam and democracy like oil and water? Because we keep letting extremists and armchair academics write our own narrative. It's time to repossess the pen, and the Amman message gives us the legal pad. So picture a scroll signed by more than 500 heavyweight scholars, Sunni, Shia, Ibadi, Sufi, Salafi. In 2004, they met in Jordan and said, enough fragmentation. This house needs new wiring. Their 3-point blueprint became known as the Amman message. 8 legal schools, all legit, takfir off the table, fatwas only by credentialed grown-ups. That's not theological fluff. That's a firewall against the viruses of sectarianism and lone wolf ideology. So why this matters for democracy? Because democracy is messy. So is Islam's legal matrix. But the Amman message does what a good constitution does. It names stakeholders, defines red lines, and sets up quality control. Stakeholders. It recognizes every mainstream maktab, a pluralist roster older than most nation states. Red lines. You can't excommunicate people because they pray with their arms higher or lower than yours. I'm giggling because my godchildren put their mustache in between the pages, so I'm sorry. No, we're serious, but quality control. Fatwas come with a license of accountability, not a YouTube channel or a PayPal wall. So strip out the Arabic, and that's Madisonian logic. Representation, minority protections, checks and balances. Let's connect the dots. So sure, a consultative decision-making appears in the Quran. Jirga Afghan tribal councils predate the Prophet, peace be upon him, by centuries. These are indigenous democratic engines. The Amman message tunes them up for the 21st century superhighway. From informal to institutional, local councils morph into municipal boards and fatwa councils with transparent rules. From might makes right to credential makes right. Knowledge outranks Kalashnikovs. That's how you build participatory governance without importing prefab systems that fall apart at the first sandstorm. Flashback to Herat in 2009. The local council didn't want to hear about democracy from me. I told them that no two democracies are the same, just like no two Muslims are the same. I gave them an example of how British democracy, with the House of Lords, a hereditary representative body, is appalling to Americans, but it's democracy nonetheless. And that Afghans have been practicing democracy at the Shura and Jirga level longer than any democratic nation has been in existence. Utilizing Islam as a framework to set stakeholder guidelines and contextualize democracy with the little d into something that is wholly Afghan isn't something that is a foreign concept at all. One elder stood up and said, "This is who we are." And everyone started nodding their heads. So the problem is it takes work to come up with a new system that's appropriate for not only dealing with the local level, but the regional, national, and international level. And we're uniquely set up to do that. It's in our DNA. So what's the lesson? When communities own a consensus document, it beats foreign white papers hands down. From consensus to legislation, let's look at the ripple effect. UAE's Fatwa Council fines you for freelance fanaticism. Jordan's Imam Training Institute, imams now study civic engagement alongside Hadith science. Pakistan's interfaith harmony policy cites Amman norms to shield churches and temples. Is every law perfect? No, but the architecture is there. Pluralism is welded into local legitimacy. And the elephant in the room? Yeah, but extremists still bomb us. True. And here's the unanswered, unsweetened truth. A document cannot fix unemployment or reform the police. Suhail Nahuda said, "There's no water and no pavements," when referring to the Amman message. And he's right. Governance needs asphalt, not just fatwas. But without theological consensus, every pothole becomes sectarian quicksand. Think of the Amman message as an operating system. You still need apps, such as education reform, women's rights, and anti-corruption units. But if the OS is infected with sectarian malware, no app of installation that's installed will be clean. So the call to action is a version 2.0 that comes from the people, that comes from people like us in the room. We're at the 20-year mark, and here's my Gen X punch list. Localize it. Translate the message into every dialect of every mosque bulletin board from Tangier to Kabul. Teach it before it's too late. Embed it in high school civics and Friday huppahs. Get it to the kids before TikTok theologians do. And audit your governance. If your city council, majlis, or parliament isn't as representative as Nate's school model, you're falling short. Hold a new ijma. Bring women scholars, minority sects, and yes, critics to draft the 2025 democracy upgrades that are iterative. And civil society practitioners to mobilize. Scholars, did their thing. They did their bit, and now it's time for us to take the reins. Surah 3:103 tells us, hold fast the rope of Allah, all together, and do not be divided. With the rope in the sand and the braided cord. A single fiber breaks, a braided cord hauls ships. The Amman message is that cord, 8 strands thick, consensus woven, ready to pull 1.9 billion souls toward the future where democracy speaks Arabic, Pashto, Hausa, Bahasa fluently and authentically. Democracy in the Muslim world isn't a mirage. It's an old water well we've neglected. The Amman message hands us the rope. All we've got to do is pull. Thank you.
Musical chairs.
All right, our next speakers are Palwasha El Kakar, who's the director for the Religion and Peace Building Program at CSID, which I learned is in the process of being resurrected. And along with a second presenter, whose name unfortunately didn't make it to the program, Mohammed Arif. Are you here? Okay, very good. Who is a PhD candidate at George Mason University. And they will be speaking on the topic of the evolution of authoritarianism in the Muslim world, from governance principles to autocratic rule. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of the Creator, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise is due to the compassionate Creator. Distinguished scholars, guests, and friends, assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. I'm Palwasha Kakar, and I direct the religion program at the United States Institute of Peace, which is the oldest thematic at the Institute of Peace. I'm happy to say that we have now won our case and we are supposed to be back in business. I'm joined with my colleague, Ustad Muhammad Usman Tard. I've been working with him for over 20 years in this space. And although he is now a PhD candidate, he was also a senior advisor at U.S. Institute of Peace, working with me on governance and also on women's rights in Islam. And before that, he was working in very important positions in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, both in education and in religious affairs. And this presentation really stems from our joint research that we did when the peace talks were happening in Afghanistan. And we heard that the Taliban were talking about an Islamic Nizam, and the Republic was saying we already have an Islamic system of government. Our constitution is one of the most Islamic constitutions in the world. And so there was this bafflement of misunderstanding of what is Islamic government and governance, and a lack of understanding people to be on the same page on these concepts. And so we embarked on this research to better understand how to speak and have some white papers in the background about Islamic governance from the original sources, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. I don't have the clicker, so maybe. So through this presentation, we'll talk about the principles that we did research on for the peace process, and then we'll also look at some of the historical deviations. My colleague will do that, and then finally look at the principles and how it's so relevant today. We'll do that in these three sections. So for the first section, we'll look at the principles governing ethical leadership. We'll look at the principles empowering citizen participation and the principles on mutual accountability and the social contract. Ethical leadership focuses on moral character and responsible authority. Citizenship participation is centered on public rights and political engagement, and mutual accountability emphasizes shared responsibilities. There's been a lot of reference to the Medina Constitution and to other references in the Quran, so I'll try to go quickly through some of these topics because I believe all of you are very well aware of them. But I think the way we've organized them have been helpful when we're talking about governance and also in comparison with principles of good governance that are the common parlance today when we talk about governance in peace building and development work. So in terms of the foundational principles, the first thing we emphasize is looking at stewardship in the Quran. And so the whole concept of the Khalifa is basically the beginning of understanding the importance of human beings and their role on earth as being stewards and representatives, but having the responsibility to take action and be leaders. Next slide. Okay, so we first talked about trust or amana. I think when I was first taught the importance of amana, it was more in terms of what's entrusted to me, rather than thinking of amana as leadership and trust. So leadership can also be a trust of people, and it has this moral responsibility, and it's a privilege. And I think the story of Abu Bakr, who, when he was chosen as a caliph, really stands out to explain this dynamic that's described in the Quranic verses that we have up on the screen. He stood before the people when he was elected and he said, "I've been appointed over you, but I am not the best among you. Help me if I do right and correct me if I do wrong." And that really set the ethical tone of leadership based on public trust and not personal entitlement. Next slide. The second is a very important issue that was raised before on justice and rule of law. Justice, or adl, is a divine command and ethical backbone of Islamic governance. It's important to uphold justice even against ourselves, and that's been brought up many times before. The Prophet ﷺ emphasized equality before the law. One story of the Caliph Ali radiallahu anhu, who really stands out as an example of how this really can be enforced and implemented. And that is when he lost a court case to a Jewish citizen. He took a Jewish man to court over a shield, and the judge ruled in favor of the non-Muslim because the Caliph Ali had no witnesses. That moment really became a lesson in equality before the law, that is, even the ruler is held to the same system. Next slide. Meritocracy and wisdom, that is hikmah. The verses on leadership and trust also talk about giving it to people who deserve it. entrusting responsibility to those who are capable. And wisdom is also key in effective governance. The Prophet ﷺ and Omar radiallahu ta'ala anhu exemplified this meritocracy by prioritizing integrity and capable appointments. There are many examples of how people were changed in the government when there was a more capable person that came to Omar radiallahu ta'ala anhu or was recommended. And the Prophet ﷺ also refused to appoint people who requested a leadership role rather than had the merits of being a leader. Next slide. So now we're getting to the second, the citizen rights and responsibilities, consultation and public consent. Public consent in Islam is about shura, and the emphasis is on shura, that is consultation in collective affairs. My brother John Pinot spoke about shura before, and it's not just about consultation, and as my brother Salam also mentioned, in terms of just the social contract, but it also was used as a way to appoint and elect representatives and leaders. There was through consultation, and then through a process of bay'ah or pledging allegiance that confirms the consent that caliphs were elected. In the rightly guided caliphs in the first four, that's a very important example. And many scholars after that declared that leadership that was established without that kind of consultation was illegitimate. Unfortunately, we have scholars that wrote about justifying authoritarian regimes, and we don't hear as much about, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa, who was jailed because he refused to recognize the leader that was illegitimate and not brought through public consultation. The next is on civic accountability. Citizens, are we on the next one? All right. We're talking about public consultation and public consent and civic accountability. The whole concept of Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar is to enjoin right and forbid wrong. That is to speak truth to power. And we have so many examples of this. It's about the people speaking out. And it's a duty of the people to speak out, not in terms of the government imposing this. A quick example was during the time of the Caliph Omar, when a woman spoke out and said during a public sermon that he was wrong about limiting dowry, and he accepted her correction, saying, this woman is right and Omar is wrong. The next is on the protection of rights and minorities, and we already heard about that in the Constitution of Medina that was spoken about earlier, so I won't speak to that. The last section is about mutual accountability and the social contract, and I think it's just important to note here that legitimacy is not static, that there are examples of how people had to continue to show legitimacy and that authority was not granted once and for all. And during Uthman's caliphate, he sent envoys to request the renewal of bay'ah. This wasn't ceremonial. It was important to continue to show legitimacy of the leaders. And finally, on corruption and monitoring, there are examples of how the Prophet ﷺ forbade governors from accepting gifts, and that there was continual audits, and particularly under Omar radiallahu anhu, there was a continuous auditing and holding officials accountable. So these are all examples of very clear ways that Islam lays out governance structures that are accountable to the people, that are in consultation, that have leadership and ethical leadership that are in line very much so with how we understand current day governance systems. And these were helpful as we were working through discussing peace building. Tariq sir will be talking about the second half of this presentation, which is authoritarianism and extremism. So Tariq sir will.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Good morning, yes. I will continue with the authoritarianism, rise of extremism in war and terror. It is a very long period starting from 662 until now. It's very difficult to cover, but I will be very short on going through. The important things that we already heard about it, that's the principle of governance. However, I will call it golden principle of governance because it is relevant to all good governance in the history of human being, from Yusuf alayhi salam to Musa alayhi salam to Dawood alayhi salam to Sulaiman alayhi salam, everyone. For that reason, this is not something only came in Quran, and we have to follow it as Muslim, but it is golden principle coming with فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. From that part with Adam alayhi salam, the father of all human. And that's the reason that these golden principles are implemented during the 40 years of Prophet's statehood and the 30 years of Khulaf. According to the saying of Prophet, peace be upon him, 30 years the Khilafah will continue. After that, the autocrats will come, the kings. And that's where this authoritarianism started. In another hadith, narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari, it says that the facade corruption of this ummah will be done by the hand of few younger Quraysh. And that's another saying which is a forecast of Prophet Muhammad about the governance. Then, with what this started, let's talk about the content. The content is that the golden principle of governance was reversed by these people. First of all, they didn't call themselves Khalifa. As it is very famous from Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, when he was asked, he said, Ana awwal al-muluk. He didn't say Ana awwal al-Khalifa or Ana Khalifa. The other narration is from Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu. When he came to meet Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, he told him, Ya ayyuha al-Malik. He didn't tell him, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen or Khalifa. The other indication is the book written by Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, the students of Imam Abu Hanifa, called Kitab al-Kharaj. He only mentioned the example of good governance in the reform proposal that he submitted to Harun al-Rashid, the king of Abbasi. 5. Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, Ali radiallahu anhu, and Omar ibn Abdul Aziz, the Khalifa al-Khamis. There is no other Khalifa. They're all authoritarian. And the best example is I told someone that these Umayyad Abbasid dynasty until now, even Ottoman Empire, they were all fighting not for Islam, but fighting for wealth and conquest. He told me, no, you are not right. I said, I'm right because in Iraq during the Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, non-Muslim people, which called Ma'ahid or Zimmi, they become Muslim. Then the officers of Hajjaj reported to him that the jizya this year is very low. We are in deficit. Let's do something. What's happened? Because many of those people who we were taking jizya, they became Muslim. Then he ordered them to take them out of the cities to the villages and took jizya from them. It means to tell them you are not Muslim. If this was for Islam, then why they didn't care about those people? The other important point, I was warned about my time, as this is 200 pages research done by Afghan scholars. We are just talking in 10 minutes. The other point is that the policy of government started to kind of people have to be taken to illiteracy. It means education has to go. And the reason was because those people from Tabi'in and Tabi'in and others, they had a lot of knowledge of Islam. And they didn't accept this illegitimate government, as Imam Abu Hanifa called it, Bilfil, Hukuma, or La Mashru'. Then they started to think, the kings, that if we have people know Islam, they will always revolt against us. For that reason, make them uneducated. Then they start to not have education department at all. And that was another. Especially, they were very hard on women. And their policy was to put them in houses and then not let them to learn. Because the women were very hard on criticizing the kings and autocrats. There are many examples. You can go to the book of Ibn Bakr called Al-Mawfaqiyat. There are hundreds of examples of this. I will stop here, then we'll be in your service during the question and answer.
Thank you very much, Paul Bashar and Mohammed, for your illuminating paper, which actually nicely complemented the first paper by John. And I can only say is that I wish a lot of those ethical guidelines were still being enforced today. We'd be living in a different world, wouldn't we? Our third speaker is Sahar Khamis, who is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. And the title of her presentation is Defending Democracy in the Muslim World, A Path to Justice, Stability, and Prosperity. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry, because the title was actually given on top of the speaker's name. Let me rephrase that. I just gave you the title of the last presentation, and actually she will be speaking on transnational online repression and resistance, gendered digital activism to advance democracy in the Muslim world. That's the continuing, I think, what Mohammed had started talking about in terms of gendered activities.
All right, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Peace be upon you. Morning. So happy and honored to be with you in another great Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy conference. Thanks to Center for Islam and Democracy and also for MPAC, Muslim Public Affairs Council, for putting together this important and timely conference. I cannot think of a more important and timely moment to talk about the issue of authoritarianism and the need to stand against authoritarianism than the moment that we are facing now, regionally, internationally, domestically, you name it. And just very briefly, I want to make sure this is working here in terms of the slides. My topic is transnational repression and resistance, gendered activism to advance democracy in the Muslim world. So before we start, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an Egyptian-American communication scholar, and I've been conducting qualitative, ethnographic, and feminist research with a special focus on media dynamics in the Arab world and the Muslim world. My investigation has always focused on Arab and Muslim women, and it's a particular area of interest for me. Women's multiple resistances and multiple roles and activisms in the Arab and Muslim world, whether they are journalists, whether they are opponents, dissidents, activists, you name it. There's actually some kind of overlap between these categories, as my presentation is gonna show. And I am the co-editor of the book Arab Women's Activism and Socio-Political Transformation, Unfinished Gendered Revolutions. So some of my findings in this study are based on some of the topics and themes discussed in this book. Next, please. So about this study, of course we know that more than a decade ago, the Arab Spring uprisings have erupted and brought about a wide array of outcomes unfolded, of course, in these different countries. And of course, as we all know as well, women played a very important and pivotal role in the midst of these uprisings. Politically, socially, economically, they have been an important cornerstone for the initial success of the Arab Spring uprisings before things went in a wrong direction. We're going to talk about that also in a moment. But initially, what we have seen in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, is that we have seen some kind of regime change and things were looking favorable, at least at the beginning, before things started to go in a negative direction. So this study is based on interviews with 20 women activists, journalists, opponents, dissidents for different countries, 4 countries in particular, Egypt, Bahrain, Syria, and Tunisia. And of course, the names here are changed to keep them anonymous and protect their own privacy, except in a case where there's actually a journalist from Bahrain who said it's okay to use her real name. So I did that. Of course, the interviews were done over Zoom and Skype because of the geographic location. The importance of the study, very quickly, I will say it's very important to focus on women because not just I'm a professor of communication, also an affiliate professor of gender and women's studies, but mainly because women are half of society and they give birth to the second half. So we cannot talk about issues of development or advancement or democracy or change without talking about women and women's important role. It's also very important to deconstruct some of the myths and the stereotypes about Arab women / Muslim women who are usually misportrayed or misrepresented as weak and helpless and powerless or simply as sexualized objects or all of the above. So when you see images of women who are resisting, and many times with great risk to their own safety and the safety and welfare of their own families, putting themselves at risk of being arrested, harassed, detained, or even killed, that immediately changes many of these negative misperceptions, stereotypes, and myths about Arab and Muslim women. Of course, women have also suffered, Arab women and Muslim women in particular, from 3 layers of invisibility. Invisibility in everyday life, where their work and labor is oftentimes not recognized as quote-unquote work, because they don't receive a paycheck every week or every couple of weeks. So therefore, it's informal and undocumented labor. Also invisibility in academia that has not been giving them a fair share of the attention they deserve. And of course, invisibility and misrepresentation in the media as well through some of these stereotypes and misrepresentations. So it's very important to try to overcome these layers of invisibility. And illustrating as well the different activisms, resistances, and feminisms of these Arab and Muslim women. And I'm using here the plural on purpose because I don't believe that there is one-size-fits-all activism or one-size-fits-all resistance or one-size-fits-all feminism. So we have to talk about all of these in the plural, using the plural as activism, resistances, and feminisms. It is also very important here to talk about a very important phenomenon that this presentation is focusing on, which is the phenomena of cyber-feminism. Cyber-feminism, simply put, is the sister term for cyber activism. And cyber activism is the use of social media and new media in order to bring about change, to fight authoritarianism, to bring about some kind of positive social and political change in society. That is the phenomena of cyber activism. The sister term is cyber feminism. It's when women themselves try to take the digital media and social media in their own hands in order to bring about some kind of favorable change in their own societies. And in that particular sense, we can say that women are fighting what we can describe as a dual struggle. In other words, they're joining their male counterparts, their fellow male citizens, in the struggle against dictatorship and authoritarianism. They're fighting against dictatorial regimes in the Arab/Muslim world, but they're also having a parallel dual struggle to also fight against patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, discrimination, and many other things that are impacting Arab and Muslim women in particular. So it's very important to talk about all of these issues and the role of new media and social media as important tools which are used by Arab/Muslim women in this regard. Next, please. So cyberfeminism in the Arab Spring, it is not a secret, of course, that women played very, very important roles during the Arab Spring movements, not just as quote-unquote supporters of the fellow male citizens or helping them in some kind of way or nurturing them. No, they were actually at the front lines of resistance, risking their own lives, risking their own bodies. Very much activists and leaders. In many cases, we're going to see examples of leadership of some of these women in certain movements against autocracy and dictatorship and authoritarianism. Some of them were harassed, some of them were detained, arrested, killed, you name it. So they were very, very active and very much outspoken. And it's a very important thing to say that this particular moment showed some kind of grassroots activism across the board. It was trying to defy the top-down tokenism that existed before that in terms of the First Lady syndrome. Whatever the First Lady does or says gets the attention of the media. No, now it's the grassroots movement across the board. Everybody is participating from every corner of society, young, old, women, men, you name. And of course, this iconic image from the heart of Tahrir Square in Egypt is very, very iconic. Whenever I talk about the Arab Spring, I always bring about this iconic image. Next, please. And this is another one of my favorite iconic images as well. This is a very much middle-class Egyptian woman in the heart of Tahrir Square, trying to play a role in her own society and bring attention to issues of imprisonment and detention. This is Wa'il Ghunaim. He was one of the iconic figures in the revolution. And this woman was actually showing his image and saying, this guy was just detained, he was just arrested. When are we going to stop using things like the emergency law? When are we going to stop these kinds of arbitrary detentions and arrests? And that's another iconic image of how social media in particular, Facebook, Twitter, played a very important pivotal role in the midst of these uprisings. So that's another one of my favorite images as well. However, this is a very important moment of redefining what activism and resistance actually means, just like we were talking a moment ago about the indigenous, autonomous, bottom-up rather than top-down activism and resistance, which is coming from the grassroots, not from the top-down, but from the bottom-up, and engulfing different segments of society and different sectors of society across the board. Even women themselves, some of them were rich, some of them were poor, some of them were Muslims, some of them were Coptic Christians, you name it. I mean, there was this kind of inclusive moment of solidarity and unity. That is very important. And we also talked about the parallel revolution or the dual struggle of women in that particular sense, the socio-political kind of resistance and activism they have been engaging in. Next, please. The contributions of cyberfeminism, the digital media tools gave these women very, very important tools to mobilize, to organize, and to confront authoritarianism and dictatorship, to create some kind of resistance movements. It gave them the opportunity to amplify their own voices and to be heard, not just domestically or locally, but also regionally and internationally, bringing about awareness to issues like corruption, violations of human rights, sexism, misogyny, and other types of pressures that they were facing. The post-Arab Spring landscape, unfortunately, looks very different, with the reversals in the course of democracy. In many of the so-called, quote-unquote, post-Arab Spring countries, we are seeing what we can describe as authoritarian adaptation and reassertion. In other words, these regimes are now, 3 minutes, okay. These regimes are now reinventing themselves again and starting to use measures like repression, arrests, detention, forcible disappearance. In the case of women in particular, they faced additional layers of doxing, trolling, character assassination, shaming on social media, profiling, and the list can go on and on and on. However, they started to use social media to create some kind of resistance using three very important tactics: mobilization, documentation, and education. Mobilization is trying to bring people together in action. Let's organize a protest. Let's organize some kind of movement on the ground. Let's do something about it. And documentation, if anybody tries to arrest me or harass me or detain me, I'm going to use my cell phone camera as my weapon. I'm going to document this moment and I'm going to share it. It's going to go viral all over social media and on YouTube. And education is bringing awareness to society itself about the importance of democracy and the importance of women's rights. So they're engaging in three parallel struggles very quickly: a political struggle, a social struggle, and a legal struggle. The political struggle, of course, is pushing back against the governments which are authoritarian and dictatorial. One good example is a group called No Military Trials for Civilians, which was created by women lawyers and leaders in Egypt in order to try to stop any kind of military trial for any civilian in Egypt. Next slide, please. The social struggle pushing back against an issue like sexual harassment, which impacts women in particular, creating groups like Shoft Taharrush, which means I saw harassment, and Harass Map, which shows the places where these types of harassment are actually taking place. And the third one is the legal struggle. The legal struggle is often a blind spot. People don't talk about it, but it's very important to change the laws and regulations which are very much discriminating against women. Women were successful, for example, in the case of Tunisia, to create a new law which defines gendered violence not just as domestic violence, but as political violence, social violence, economic violence, any type of violence that women face in any sphere of society. So when we look at these three parallel struggles, we can clearly see how women were using the social media tools they have at their disposal in order to create positive change in their own societies and to create some kind of shift away from authoritarianism, dictatorship, autocracy, and to create some kind of favorable and positive change in their own societies. Next, please. Yes. So there are some gains and opportunities for sure. Women were able to increase the visibility of their own issues, of their own struggles, to speak up, to bring about international awareness, to bring about a lot of visibility for their own causes. And many of these women became role models, not just for other women, but even for young men and for society as a whole. Next, please. Also, they were able to really become leaders in their own right in the political, social, economic, and legal spheres, therefore shattering many of the myths and stereotypes we were talking about earlier and setting a new stage and a new phase for activism and resistance in the Arab/Muslim world. Next, please. However, there are a lot of threats and challenges as well. We have to say that the reversals in the process of democracy and democratization in this region meant also huge challenges for women. The shift from solidarity to fragmentation, from unity to polarization, the persistence of some of the negative practices and patriarchy and other negative traditions that are still impacting women. And for some people on the secular/liberal camp, they see the rise of political Islam as also a challenge. The limitations of cyberfeminism, just like everything else in life. Yes, we talked about all of these potentialities and all of these great things about cyberfeminism, but it's not a magical stick. It is not a magic stick or a magic tool. It can only go so far. It has to be the people on the ground, in this case the women on the ground themselves, who actually bring about change whenever they decide to do so and however they decide to do so. It's not an end-all, be-all. It's not like, oh, we have the digital tools, next thing we're going to have democracy. That is not the case. So to conclude, we are actually seeing some potentialities, limitations, and future prospects for gender diasporic resistance. Of course, as you can imagine, with the reversals in democracy in this part of the world, many activists, including women activists, started to leave their own countries and exercise their own activism and resistance from the diaspora. But even there, in the diaspora, they are not free of government persecution, of government intimidation going after them. We saw what happened with Jamal Khashoggi in the case of Saudi Arabia. He is not the only one, but the most famous example. So yes, you can bring about amplifying the voices of opposition and dissent. You can bring about more attention and visibility internationally, but still there are limitations and still there are threats even in the diaspora. Next, please. So these women succeeded to bring about this attention, but we can see that there is a limited trickle-down effect. In other words, when you are creating a movement in the diaspora, usually it does not trickle down to the wider segments of society, because people see you as living in the safety of Arlington, Virginia. You are not really on the ground in Tahrir Square. You are not on the ground in Tunisia or Syria. So what are you talking about? So it has some kind of limited credibility and limited on-the-ground effect, and that is one of the limitations of activism in the diaspora. And finally, a very last final word, we need to really adopt what we can call a middle ground. We don't want to be in the extremes of too much optimism or too much pessimism, because both of them are unfavorable extremes. Whether in terms of talking about the phenomena of cyber activism and cyber feminism, we need to stay away from what we call cyber pessimism or cyber optimism, and to adopt the middle ground of cyber realism. See it for what it is, acknowledge the powers and the strengths, but also the weaknesses and the limitations. And the same thing when we talk about the future of democracy and activism and resistance in this part of the world. We need to acknowledge what has been done, what has been achieved, but we also need to be honest about what remains to be done and the threats and challenges ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sahar, for that very useful and impassioned presentation, providing us with a very helpful survey of the various kinds of women's activisms, particularly digital activisms that we don't hear very much about, and how that's contributing to the promotion of democracy in the Muslim majority world. Our final speaker is Irma Maharadze, who is an independent researcher from Tbilisi Institute of Asia and Africa. And she is speaking on the topic of, now this time, defending democracy in the Muslim world, a path to justice, stability, and prosperity.
First of all, I would like to greet the organizers of the conference, participants, and all the guests. And I really feel privileged that I've made this long way to come and participate in this really interesting event. So, in today's global political climate, Muslim majority countries face a range of complex and interconnected challenges. These challenges have made it increasingly important to defend and strengthen democratic governance. Democratic systems are especially valuable in societies with diverse populations. Many Muslim majority states are home to a rich mix of ethnic, religious, and cultural groups. When democratic principles are applied, such as the protection of minority rights and the encouragement of broad political participation, they help reduce marginalization and build social unity. There is ongoing debate about the relationship between Islamic teachings and democratic values. Muslim societies have different political histories and cultural backgrounds, which shape their views on governance. One of the main points of today's discussion is how Islamic ideas can align with and even support democratic principles. While democracy is sometimes seen as a Western concept, its core values such as human dignity, individual freedom, and inclusive governance are universal and can be meaningful and relevant across different cultures and religious contexts. Many scholars, next slide please. Many scholars argue that the Quran contains principles that can support democratization, such as shura, consultation, adl, equality or justice, religious tolerance, accountability, and opposition to oppression and tyranny. Shura, consultation, the slide before please. What I tried to do it was to search for the principles in the Quran which is relevant to democracy, and to bring these principles to strengthen the idea of democracy, the idea that it is possible to make a basis, a good basis in the religious book itself for a modern realization of democracy in Muslim majority countries. So, the Quran says, consult them in matters, and when you have decided, then rely upon Allah, which encourages leaders to consult their people. The concept of shura, mutual consultation, can be highlighted as a democratic principle. It suggests that rulers should not act dictatorially, but should consult with the people. Some modern Muslim scholars and activists interpret shura as the Islamic foundation for parliamentary democracy, or systems where leaders are accountable to people. Equality and justice. Quran says, indeed, Allah commands you to render trust to whom they are due, and when you judge between people, and judge with justice. This calls just governance and trustworthy leadership. Justice, or adl, is a core value. In a democratic system, this would translate to laws that are fairly applied, leadership that is accountable, and institutions that serve everyone equally. One of the important principles, in my opinion, is also that there is no compulsion in religion. Quran says there is no compulsion in religion. The right path has become distinct from the wrong. This supports freedom of choice in matters of faith. Freedom of conscience is a key democratic value. This verse is often cited to argue for political systems that protect individual freedoms, including religious one. Accountability. Regarding accountability in Quran, we find many different verses, but I will cite only one of them. Indeed, we have made you a successor upon the earth, so judge between the people in truth, and do not follow your own desire, as it will lead you astray from the way of Allah. This is for leaders who must govern with truth and justice, avoiding personal bias. Some Islamic thinkers have expanded this idea to justify political accountability mechanisms. And the next thing is opposition to tyranny and oppression. Quranic basis for it is found in 4th Surah, 75th verse. And what is the matter with you that you fight not in the cause of Allah, and for the oppressed among men, women, and children who say, O Lord, take us out of this city and of oppressive people, and appoint for us from yourself a protector, and appoint for us from yourself a helper. This encourages standing against oppression and for the right of the oppressed. With Islamic intellectual tradition, which provides substantial support for the principles of democratization rooted in the Quran, emphasizes on consultation, justice, accountability, Al-Mawardi, writing in the 11th century, I guess the slide before, please. The previous slide, please. Okay, so Al-Mawardi, writing in the 11th century, maintained that the political authority should emerge through consultation among the qualified and must serve the public good. Al-Ghazali further reinforced this notion by arguing that rules derive legitimacy from their adherence to justice, and that the people have a duty to advise and, if necessary, correct their leaders. Ibn Taymiyyah advanced these ideas by asserting that governance is a divine trust and rulers must uphold justice or be held accountable by the community. Building upon these classical foundations, modern Islamic thinkers, next slide please, have argued that democracy is not only compatible with Islamic governance but essential to its ethical realization. Khalid Abu al-Fadl contends that democracy operationalizes the Quranic mandates for consultation and justice by institutionalizing public participation and safeguarding moral responsibility. Rashid Ghanouchi similarly emphasizes that Islam supports a civil state based on political pluralism, electoral competition, and individual freedoms. Abdul Karim Surush offers a profound philosophical rationale, asserting that while divine revelation is infallible, human understanding of religion is inherently fallible, thus necessitating democratic openness to divine interpretations and critical discourse. Together, these classical and contemporary perspectives reveal that democratization is not an alien import to Islam, but rather a modern articulation of its enduring moral and political ideas. Empirical studies indicate that democratic governance correlates with sustainable economic development as it promotes institutional transparency and adherence to the rule of law. Authoritarian regimes, by contrast, frequently engender corruption and economic stagnation due to the absence of accountability mechanisms. The establishment of subtle democratic institutions in Muslim-majority states has the potential to attract foreign investment, alleviate poverty, and enhance overall socio-economic development. Educational initiatives that emphasize the theoretical and practical congruence of democratic principles with Islamic governance can serve a counter prevailing misconception and bolster public support for democratic reforms. Additionally, institutional actors must adopt a strategic approach in supporting democratization efforts, one that involves diplomatic engagement, economic investments, and institutional capacity building, while simultaneously respecting the principle of non-interference in domestic political affairs. Finally, sustainable economic development constitutes a fundamental pillar of democratic stability. Policymakers must prioritize strategies aimed at reducing socioeconomic disparities and enhancing access to essential services, including education, healthcare, and employment opportunities. The defense and promotion of democracy within the Muslim world thus emerge not only an ethical imperative but also as a strategic necessity in counteracting global authoritarianism. By integrating democratic governance with fundamental Islamic principles of justice and equity, Muslim majority nations can cultivate political systems and uphold human dignity, foster economic prosperity, and contribute to international peace and stability. In conclusion, the defense of democracy in the Muslim world is not merely a political choice, it is a moral, theological, and strategic imperative. As illustrated, Islamic principles such as Shura, Adl, and Mas'uliyah are not only compatible with democratic governance but can actively enrich and legitimize it. By drawing on both classical Islamic thought and contemporary scholarship, Muslim majority societies can forge a unique indigenous model of democracy, one that is faithful to their religious heritage while responsive to modern political and socio-economic realities. The journey toward democratic resilience will require sustained efforts in education, civil society empowerment, and international cooperation, but it remains a vital and achievable goal for a just and prosperous future. Thank you for your attention.